several Americans who they want to question who they claim were involved in Bill Browder's quote-unquote crimes in their terms, including a former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Does President Trump support that idea? Is he open to having U.S. officials question Russia?
The president's going to meet with his team, and we'll let you know when we have an announcement on that.
For a second, is that a topic that came up in their conversation? Did President Putin raise this with President Trump?
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front.
What? The fact that the answer to that question wasn't an immediate, instant, and emphatic no, maybe on brand for the Trump administration, but it is not normal. The White House press secretary is saying she'll let us know if the president decides he's going to allow Vladimir Putin and Russia to question an American citizen. If we're lucky enough to have you as a loyal viewer, you might recognize former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. He's an international affairs analyst here for MSNBC and NBC News, a vocal Russia critic, and now apparently one of Vladimir Putin's targets. All of it over a conspiracy theory having to do with alleged money laundering and the Clinton campaign. Trump and Putin now supposedly talked about McFaul, as confirmed by the White House press secretary, in the one-on-one meeting that we still know nothing about. Joining us on set, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for RealClearPolitics, and Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root and an MSNBC contributor. Aaron, Eli, and Jeremy are still with us. Jeremy, I got to start with you because I know Ambassador McFaul is someone that you've worked with in government over the years. He's a friend of many of ours, and this is stunning. This is we throw around the term banana republic a little too loosely these days, but this, if anything, is it.
Michael McFaul has been an expert on U.S.-Soviet affairs, U.S.-Russian affairs, going back 20, 25 years. He worked on the National Security Council. He was the United States ambassador in Moscow. The fact that the President of the United States would talk with Vladimir Putin about an investigation of a U.S. ambassador, of an American citizen, an American government official, just shows the extent to which I think President Trump, in that one-on-one, kind of gave it all up, gave it all up for Team America. And basically, he was led around by Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin dictated the agenda. We had no agenda going into that meeting. The president didn't know what he wanted to talk about. And when Putin said, I want to investigate your people, he turned the tables on the president, and it's amazing that the president capitulated. It goes to show the extent to which President Trump is just totally deferring to one of America's most capable adversaries.
And Jeremy, we throw around the term obliteration of norms in the context of tweets that are rude and crude and crass. We throw around that term in the context of behavior and conduct usually. But I've never seen an example of an obliteration of norms that could seriously endanger American diplomats around the world. I mean, we put a lot of career diplomats in dangerous places, and you now have an American president talking to an American adversary about letting him investigate him in a criminal investigation. Can you just talk about the implications for American government employees and officials in the intelligence community and the military if a statement like that sets a precedent for the U.S. government?
You know, we have ambassadors, both political appointees, but also career ambassadors all over the world, in most of the capitals around the world. I think you're going to see a very strong reaction, Nicolle, from those ambassadors back to the White House to say, don't hang us out to dry. We need to know that we have the full backing, not just diplomatic community, but the full political backing of our government when we go out there and do the work that you ask us to do. It applies not just to diplomats. It applies to military officials, the Joint Chiefs. It applies to the combatant commanders. It applies to intelligence officers. It applies to every single American who's doing the work on behalf of the American people all around the world. If the President of the United States doesn't have their back and, in fact, is going to stab them in the back, we're just not going to have the people on the front lines to protect us.
All right, A.B. Stoddard, Ambassador McFaul was on with our colleague Chris Jansing a little bit ago, and she asked him, do you have any expectation that your government is going to do this to you? Here was his answer.
But I'm asking you honestly, do you have any expectation your government will do that?
I do. I don't expect President Trump to do it, but there's a lot of good people in the Trump administration. They know how crazy this is, and I hope they understand that by not responding to these outrageous claims, somehow some symmetry between an alleged cockamamie money laundering scheme completely fabricated for political reasons, and the indictment that Mr. Mueller did last Friday, there's no symmetry to that, and they have to push back publicly, because if they don't, it's yet one more victory for Vladimir Putin.
Your thoughts?
It's so interesting what's happened since the walk back, which seems like a long time ago now. The 2 letters and an apostrophe, which sounds like a bad off-Broadway play. Republicans are so happy that they were given that cleanup because they wanted to say now he's clarified things and he's sort of reset. And so it's sort of the cover that they wanted to go back to business as usual. And they want the focus of the conversation and debate to be on how to confront Russia and how to assure our allies in Europe. And they want it off of Trump. And so now with
well,
this,
I mean, that's like you just named 3 things they're never going to get.
But with this sort of dramatic question that Maggie Haberman, I mean, thank goodness she asked that question, and her follow-up question, in which Sarah Sanders admitted it was part of the 2-hour private meeting with Vladimir Putin. Republicans now have to respond to Ambassador McFaul, and they have to respond. What happened in that 2-hour meeting? We can't move on, even after this clarification from President Trump and an insert of a few letters. We can't move on until we know why Russian state media is pushing out propaganda saying there were some commitments that were made by the U.S. government to the Russian government. The Republicans, it is incumbent on them to get those answers, and they cannot move on and say there was a cleanup effort, so I want to talk about something else. If they don't drag the translator in, they have to find out the answers from the Secretary of State, but they have to find the answers out for not only Ambassador McFaul, but what else was discussed in that meeting? It's frightening.
Jason Johnson, there are calls to bring up the translator. I don't know if there's any precedent for that, but what is there precedent these days,
right.
As well as the Secretary of State. You think Republicans, I mean, I'm just tired of hoping against hope that they'll find their voices, steal their spines, whatever you want to say. You think they'll be pacified with something less than that, or do you think we'll see the translator testify?
No, I don't think we'll see the translator testify. And even if we did, I mean, they're not stenographers, right? The translator doesn't necessarily remember everything that happened in a 2-hour
It's not their job.
It's not their job to know that kind of information. So even if we ask whoever the translator is, they may not be versed enough in everything that was talked about. But what I find so disturbing about this, on 2 levels. Number one, it demonstrates the fact that Vladimir Putin was so much more prepared in this conversation than the president was. He knew every single alt-right conspiracy theory that he could throw out to get Donald Trump to say,
he probably created a few of them.
Exactly. He's like, I actually wrote this one for you, right? He had this whole thing prepared, but also the fact that, you know, the president of the United States has consistently demonstrated that he will sell out the American people to any of these world leaders that he wants to have a better relationship with. Remember, he didn't go against Erdogan when his own security team beat up American protesters. Of course he'd sell out an American ambassador. And everyone in foreign service across the country today has to worry, well, goodness, if this nation accuses me of spying, is Trump going to sell me out? And that weakens us internationally if people don't know that their jobs are safe.
And just pull the thread a little bit. I mean, we know about the cockamamie idea of having Putin and Mueller, you know, co-interview the 12 or 13 indicted Russians because they talked about it at the press conference. But this is one of the first real bombshells to come out of the secret meeting. What do you think the sort of vast scope of potential secret deals and shenanigans is that took place in that 2-hour meeting?
It certainly raises the question, and that was another thing that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked today, and she didn't provide much of an answer. I kind of doubt that there was anything specifically agreed to, but the fact that they were talking about things like this does make you wonder what else they were talking about.
It certainly shows that they weren't talking about big things.
Well,
they were settling scores. This was a conversation about people that bugged them.
Bill Browder rather than 2016 election interference. That's a pretty bad omen. But I think it's worth noting here, Maggie's question was great, and I'm glad she asked it because a lot of people skip this. Twice on Monday, the president described this proposal from Vladimir Putin, which Putin said during the press conference, and he called it an incredible offer.
Yep.
He wasn't specifically responding to the Browder aspect of it, but the broad strokes of this idea that Mueller would interview Russians and Russia would interview Americans of some stature was addressed by the president, and he liked it. And that kind of got lost in all this, and now we're confronting something that got lost because the president was so friendly.
And Eli, it's a great point. The president did give Putin's proposal, and because the president brags about not preparing, we have to assume it came from Putin, his seal of approval from the American commander-in-chief for this ludicrous idea that they would, do some sort of swap of suspects and enemies of each state.
But Jeremy said this is why people were worried about the president being alone.
But why wasn't John Bolton worried? Why wasn't Mike Pompeo worried?
Because they serve at the pleasure of the president. I mean, everybody in this administration.
But why not quit? When is someone going to say he might give away an ambassador? He might give away a country?
Yeah, I mean, we have haven't seen that yet, so I don't know where that line is. But I was sitting in the room on Monday, and the president stood up there next to Putin, and there was confusion because before he called it incredible, he just teased it. He said, "Oh, you know, Putin's come up with this very interesting idea," and then he didn't even explain what it was. He kind of dragged it out. You could see from having dealt with Trump and having seen how he is manipulated or easily duped or easily led into certain positions, even by his own cabinet members who sometimes like to tell him that something they want him to do is his idea. There's so much manipulation that goes on, and you can see Putin basically coming up with this idea and framing it in a way that to Trump it sounded like a concession. It sounded like a great plan. It sounded like collaboration. And that was the way that he presented it, even though he wasn't specific about it on Monday. The first time he was talking about it, introducing it and laying it out, he was saying it was incredible. He was saying almost framing it as an act of good faith on the part of Putin, that Putin was willing to do this. Pretty incredible offer. Just tells you about why people were so concerned about having the president alone with this former KGB agent for 2+ hours with nobody else in the room.
Donald Trump making Russia great again. After the break, the president picking up another Russian talking point, and this one is on tape. We'll show it to you after this.